Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
It's great to be diving into this one today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So I want you, the listener, to just imagine for a second being given a life assignment that, without a doubt, will fundamentally break your heart.
Right. Not just a tiny mistake.
Exactly. Not a temporary lapse in judgment, but a deliberate, intentional directive. You are asked to deliberately marry someone who is practically guaranteed to betray you.
Yeah, it's heavy.
And not just a private betrayal, but a public, humiliating, agonizing betrayal. Today's deep dive takes us right into the center of a marriage that is, well, it's an absolute train wreck by design.
That is a perfect way to put it.
We are stepping into the first 3 chapters of the ancient biblical book of Hosea. And I'll be honest with you, right from the start, if you are looking for a clean, neatly packaged historical text with a simple, do this, don't do that, moral at the end, you are in the wrong place.
Oh, completely the wrong place.
This text is messy, it's provocative, it is deeply, intensely personal.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
Because what we're looking at in these 3 chapters is a physical human marriage that basically serves as a massive, unavoidable mirror.
Right, a mirror for us.
Exactly. A mirror for human fidelity, for the cascading, compounding consequences of the choices we make. And ultimately, it's a window into a kind of relentless, incomprehensible love that just defies all modern logic.
Yeah, it really does.
When we approach texts like this, we have to drop our desire for a clinical breakdown. We aren't looking at a textbook. We are looking at a bleeding heart.
Well said. But before we jump into the deep end of this marriage, we really need to set the stage, because the environment where this is happening is absolutely crucial to understanding why the message is so shocking.
Right. Context is everything here.
So we're in the 8th century BC. And from what I understand from our sources, if you were a citizen of the northern kingdom of Israel during this time, specifically during the reign of Jeroboam II, you're probably feeling pretty good about your life, right?
Yeah, very good.
Like the economy was booming.
Booming is an understatement, honestly.
Yeah.
If you were looking at the quarterly earnings reports of 8th century BC Israel, the charts were up and to the right.
Just a straight line up.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Under Jeroboam II, the nation experienced a period of immense outward economic prosperity that they hadn't seen in generations.
Wow.
The borders were expanding, meaning they controlled more of the highly lucrative international trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Wealth was accumulating at just an astonishing rate.
So people were getting rich.
Very rich. They were building winter houses and summer houses out of hewn stone, decorating them with imported ivory. It was, think of it like the ancient equivalent of a massive tech boom.
Right, like Silicon Valley in the early 2000s or something.
Exactly. Everyone is getting rich. The military is strong. Outwardly, the nation is functioning at absolute peak performance.
Okay, but there is always a but with these ancient prosperity booms, isn't there?
Oh, always.
Outwardly, they have the summer houses and the ivory, but inwardly?
Inwardly, the society is experiencing severe moral and spiritual decay. Our sources note that this outward success was completely masking a hollow core.
A hollow core. Let's unpack that.
Well, the wealth was incredibly concentrated at the top. It was built on the systemic oppression of the poor. Justice in the courts was basically being bought and sold.
So it's corrupt.
Highly corrupt.
Yeah.
And spiritually, they had completely lost their anchor. They were participating in the rituals of their faith on paper.
Going through the motions.
Right, going through the motions.
Yeah.
But their actual devotion, their actual trust had shifted to the surrounding cultural idols.
Which idols specifically?
Specifically, the Canaanite gods of fertility and agriculture, the Baals. They were a nation functioning entirely on momentum and outward optics, but their soul was just bankrupt.
If you're listening to this right now, I want you to think about how aggressively relevant that is to our 21st century reality.
It's unsettling, really.
It is. How often do we see this exact same dynamic today? You look at a massive corporation and their stock is soaring, their PR is flawless, their campuses are gorgeous.
But the internal culture is completely toxic.
Yes. Employees are burned out and the whole thing is a house of cards. Or even more uncomfortably, think about the individual level.
Yeah, we're going to get closer to home.
You can have a glowing resume. The bank account is full. The career is peaking. The social media feed is a flawless curation of vacations and smiling family photos.
The perfect optics.
Right. You look like you are winning. But internally, You're running on absolute fumes.
Just exhausted.
You are morally or emotionally compromised. You are deeply disconnected from your partner, your kids, your own conscience. That is the exact tension the author Hosea steps into.
And it's a tough environment to speak into because when people are rich, they don't think they have a problem.
Exactly. And to shatter this illusion of success, the text doesn't start with a political critique. It starts with this deeply disturbing personal assignment.
It really does. Because if a society is completely numb, a standard theological lecture just isn't going to wake them up.
No one listens to lectures when they're making money.
Right. So the text begins with a command from God to Hosea in chapter 1, verse 2. It says, "Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms."
Which is just a shocking thing to read.
It is. He's commanded to marry a woman named Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. And in ancient literature, names are never just names.
Right. They always mean something deeper.
They're destiny. They're theological arguments. Our sources point out the incredible symbolism embedded right here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Gomer signifies completion, but in this context, it implies a completion of corruption. Like, she is fully given over to her lifestyle.
Oh, okay. And what about to blame?
To blame literally translates to 2 cakes of figs.
2 cakes of figs. I love diving into these ancient idioms because they sound so weird to us, but they pack such a punch.
They really do.
So figs in the ancient Near East, they weren't just a snack, right?
Not at all. They were incredibly sweet. They were a luxury item. They represented sensuality, absolute indulgence, basically the height of luxury.
Right. If you map it to today, it would be like saying she is the daughter of, I don't know, designer labels and expensive caviar.
That's a perfect modern translation. So right from the opening sentence, the text is laying down this profound psychological premise.
Which is what?
That the sweetness of sin, the indulgence of absolute luxury without any moral grounding, is the parent of destruction.
That is powerful.
And Gomer isn't just a person in this narrative.
Mm.
She represents an entire people who have given themselves completely over to corrupting pleasure.
Okay, pause for a second, because I'm struggling with this, and I know anyone listening who is encountering this for the first time is probably feeling the exact same friction.
Yeah, it's a very difficult concept.
We are talking about a holy man, a prophet, a spiritual leader in his community, and he is being told by the divine to intentionally marry someone famous for infidelity.
Some of the text implies is already steeped in a highly scandalous lifestyle, yes.
But that sounds less like divine wisdom and more like a bizarre, traumatizing PR stunt. It feels cruel to Hosea.
It really does feel that way.
How are we supposed to read this? Like, is this literal history, or is it just some sort of fever dream, like a vision he had?
You're hitting on a debate that biblical scholars and historians have agonized over for centuries, honestly.
I can imagine.
Some argue it must be an allegory or a vision, because a holy God would never ask a prophet to violate the moral codes of the day so blatantly.
That makes sense.
But others argue that if it's just a story he told, it loses all its emotional weight. It has to be a literal historical marriage to actually carry the pain the text describes.
Right, an allegory doesn't hurt. A real marriage hurts.
Exactly. But what our sources emphasize is that whether this was literal history played out in the streets of Samaria, or a vivid, deeply felt prophetic vision that Hosea communicated to the people, the underlying mechanism and purpose remain exactly the same.
Which is?
The prophet's life is becoming the sermon.
It's performance art, essentially, but with the highest possible stakes.
Exactly. It forces the people of Israel to visually and emotionally confront their own behavior.
Because humans are incredibly good at intellectualizing their flaws.
Oh, they're the best at it.
Yeah.
We can justify anything if we keep it abstract.
True.
By acting this out, by marrying Gomer, God is using the incredibly visceral, relatable framework of human marriage to show the people exactly what their harmless spiritual drifting actually looks like.
So he's mapping their spiritual life onto a physical marriage.
Yes. God is casting himself as the faithful, desperately in love, deeply wronged spouse.
And Israel is the unfaithful one.
And Israel, and by extension, humanity as a whole, is cast as the adulterous partner who constantly chases other lovers, which, in their specific historical context, meant bowing down to false gods and idols for economic gain.
And that framework is deeply, deeply uncomfortable. It's an obstacle to our modern sensibilities on 2 massive fronts, I think.
What's the first one?
Well, first, it completely offends our modern philosophical concept of what the divine is supposed to be.
Oh, yeah. We like a clean, detached God.
Exactly. We are very comfortable with a God who is an abstract, unmoved mover. A God who is stoic, sitting on a cloud, objectively pulling the levers of the universe.
Right. We don't mind a God who gets angry in a judicial courtroom sort of way either.
Right. But a God who feels the agonizing, humiliating sting of romantic betrayal. A God who is vulnerable to human rejection. That makes us squirm.
It really does. It implies a level of intimacy that is terrifying. It implies that our actions actually affect the heart of the divine. And you're right, that is a terrifying level of responsibility. But the second obstacle might be even harder for us to swallow.
Lay it on me.
It completely offends our ego to be cast as Gomer.
Oh, absolutely.
Whenever we read a story, watch a movie, or hear a deep dive like this, we instinctively cast ourselves as the hero, or at least the misunderstood protagonist doing their best.
We never want to see ourselves as the serial betrayer.
Never.
And if we're not careful, we can use the ancient cultural setting as a shield to protect our egos.
What do you mean?
We can look at this text and say, well, the ancient patriarchal framing of women in marriage here is problematic, or I don't relate to these 8th century BC gender dynamics, and just use that as an excuse to dismiss the whole thing.
Oh, that's a classic avoidance tactic.
And to be clear, the ancient scaffolding is very different from our modern ethics of marriage.
Sure.
But if we get bogged down in critiquing the ancient cultural vehicle, we completely miss the enduring, terrifying wisdom it's carrying.
Because the universal tragedy being described here isn't about ancient marriage laws.
Right. It's the tragedy of betraying one's own highest commitments.
That is the critical pivot for a modern reader. We have to look past the cultural scaffolding to the core human behavior. You and I might not be walking out to the edge of town to offer grain to a golden statue of Baal today.
Hopefully not.
Right. But we absolutely cheat on our highest values every single day.
We do. We make vows, whether literal vows at an altar or internal vows to ourselves. We promise to be present with our children. We vow to maintain our integrity at work, even when the pressure is on.
We commit to taking care of our physical and mental health.
Yes. And then we abandon those deeply held commitments for the lovers of the modern world.
So true.
We trade our integrity for a slight bump in career advancement. We trade presence with our family for the dopamine hit of social status and scrolling.
Just endless scrolling.
We trade our peace of mind for the illusion of wealth. We are trading our moral center for a couple of fig cakes.
And we do it so seamlessly, with such sophisticated self-justification. We convince ourselves that those lesser lovers are what actually sustain us.
I have to work this 80-hour week and miss dinner again. It's for the family.
Exactly. We give our absolute best energy, our prime cognitive hours, and our deepest devotions to systems and structures that cannot possibly love us back.
Wow. Yeah.
A corporation will never hold your hand on your deathbed. Social media clout will never comfort you in a crisis, yet we give them the devotion of a spouse.
So if you're listening to this deep dive, let's translate this into your reality right this second. What are the figs in your life?
That's the question.
What are the modern luxuries, the status symbols, or even just the subtle comforts that are secretly drawing you away from the person you actually want to be?
Who or what are the lesser lovers getting the best of your time?
Right. Your time, your energy, and your integrity, while your true priorities get the leftovers. It's a heavy question, but we have to sit with it because the story Hosea is telling doesn't stop at the wedding altar.
No, it doesn't.
It moves into the reality of what happens when that betrayal actually takes root.
Right. A fractured foundation doesn't just stay quietly fractured. The damage spills over.
It cascades.
It does. And we see this vividly as the text turns to the offspring of this broken union. Hosea and Gomer begin having children.
And in Hosea chapter 1, we are introduced to 3 kids.
Yes, each given a highly symbolic, genuinely ominous name. This illustrates a profound psychological and sociological truth. Betrayal doesn't just affect the couple in a vacuum.
Right. It alters the whole environment.
It shapes the future, and it infects the generations to come.
These kids' names are basically walking billboards of impending doom for the nation.
They really are.
Let's walk through them because the progression here is chilling. The first child is a son, and God tells Hosea to name him Jezreel.
The name Jezreel means God will scatter or God will sow. But more importantly, it is a glaring geographical and historical reference.
Okay, what's the history there?
Well, the text specifically says, I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu. To understand this, we have to look at the history our sources provide.
Let's do it.
About a century before Hosea, there was a king named Jehu. He was actually commissioned by a prophet to wipe out the corrupt, incredibly wicked royal house of Ahab.
Ahab and Jezebel, right?
Yes, exactly. And Jehu did it. He orchestrated a massive bloody slaughter in the Valley of Jezreel. Now, on paper, Jehu was carrying out a divine mandate to clean house.
But here is where the psychology of it gets so incredibly relevant to us. He did the right thing, but he did it for the absolute worst reasons.
Precisely.
Jehu didn't slaughter Ahab's family out of a deep devotion to justice or a desire to purify the nation. He did it for his own ruthless political ambition.
He used the cover of divine mandate to serve his own massive ego and solidify his authoritarian power.
He essentially weaponized a good cause for personal gain, which happens all the time today.
It does. And the wisdom here is piercing. You could do the right action, but if your internal motivation is entirely corrupt, selfish, and ambitious, that action rots from the inside out.
Wow.
It becomes a sin that eventually catches up with you. The text predicts that because of this deep-seated corruption, the military strength of Israel, described poetically as the bow of Israel, will be decisively broken in that exact same valley of Jezreel.
So the very first consequence of this societal betrayal is the shattering of outward strength.
Exactly. The military might, the economic security, the things they relied on to project power, all of it will fail.
So that's the first child, the breaking of outward strength. Then they have a second child, a daughter, and her name is Lo-Ruhamah. This one always hits me hard.
It is a devastating name. Lo-Ruhamah translates roughly to not pitied or no more mercy.
No more mercy. That's bleak.
Very bleak. The root of the Hebrew word for mercy here, rohoma, is closely connected to the word for a mother's womb. It implies a deep, visceral, unconditional compassion.
Like the protective love a mother feels for her child.
Right. And God says, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel. It is the total withdrawal of that internal cushion of grace.
And finally, they have a third child, a son named Lo-Ami.
Which translates to, not my people. God says, you are not my people, and I will not be your God. It is the complete severing of the covenantal relationship. It's ultimate alienation.
I want to map this progression onto the slow death of a human relationship because it follows this exact terrifying trajectory.
It maps perfectly.
Think about a marriage, a friendship, or a business partnership that is falling apart. First, you hit the Jezreel phase. The outward strength breaks down.
The shared activities stop.
Right. You used to go on dates. You used to collaborate on projects. You used to talk about the future. Now the bow is broken. The outward structure of the relationship collapses. You are just existing in the same space.
That's the structural breakdown. But then comes the psychological breakdown. The Lo-Ruhamah phase. The loss of mercy.
Because when a relationship is healthy, there is a massive cushion of grace.
There is. If your partner forgets to take out the trash, you think, oh, they had a long day. You extend the benefit of the doubt.
But when the betrayal is deep and the distance has grown, that mercy is completely withdrawn.
Suddenly, forgetting the trash is proof that they are selfish, lazy, and don't care about you at all.
Exactly. Every single minor infraction is scrutinized under a microscope. There is no pity. There is no grace. It is just raw, exposed friction.
Which inevitably leads to the final phase, Lo-Ami, total loss of identity.
You look at the person sitting across from you at the dinner table, someone you've known for a decade, and you realize, I don't even know who you are anymore.
You are a stranger.
You are not my person. And what is so crucial for us to understand here is the causality. The text isn't describing a sudden, irrational fit of rage from a temperamental deity.
No, not at all.
The withdrawal of grace and identity is the natural, unavoidable momentum of persistent, unrepentant distance. When you consistently walk away from your source, you don't get punished by the dark. You just naturally find yourself in the dark.
It's the physics of relationships. If you continually sow deception and distance, you eventually reap total alienation.
Yeah.
But, and this is what makes Hosea such a masterpiece of ancient literature, just as the text hits this absolute rock bottom of despair, it completely flips.
Right, as the door slams shut.
Exactly. Just as it says, you are not my people, it executes a breathtaking pivot. In Hosea 1.10, immediately following this judgment, it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. And in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God.
That transition gives me whiplash every time. It's like standing in the middle of a funeral and someone suddenly starts passing out birth announcements.
It refuses to let despair have the final word. Our sources highlight that this promises a massive restorative transformation.
And it happens right in the same place.
Yes, notice the phrasing, in the place where it was said. The very site of their rejection, the very environment of their failure, becomes the exact site of their redemption.
That speaks to a profound psychological and spiritual resilience.
It does. Even when identity is completely lost, when you have hit the low-ammy phase and you don't even recognize yourself anymore, the potential for massive, sweeping rebirth remains entirely intact.
So, bringing this back to you, the listener, let's look at the momentum of your own life right now. Think about a small daily habit that you've been excusing lately.
We all have them.
Maybe it's how you speak to your spouse when you're stressed. Maybe it's a corner you're cutting at work. Maybe it's the sheer amount of time you spend numbing out on a screen instead of engaging with your life.
Yeah.
You know it isn't aligned with who you want to be. Audit that habit right now. Is that tiny action subtly naming your future, not my people?
Is it laying a brick on the road toward isolation?
Right, toward loss of mercy and alienation. Or are your daily actions building towards sons of the living God? Are they cultivating a profound, resilient connection with your highest self and with the people around you? Because actions have momentum.
They do. And sometimes that momentum is so strong and we are so blind to it that we just cannot stop ourselves.
We're running downhill.
We're running downhill, chasing our lesser lovers, completely oblivious to the cliff edge approaching. And that is exactly where Chapter 2 comes in.
It addresses the question, what happens when the wronged spouse decides to intervene?
How do you stop someone who is hell-bent on their own destruction?
This brings us to what I genuinely believe is one of the most brilliant, counterintuitive concepts in this entire deep dive.
It's fascinating.
If the children represented the compounding consequences of betrayal, Chapter 2 reveals the mechanics of intervention. And the imagery here is startling.
It's very graphic.
The text describes the mother representing Israel as frantic. She is sprinting after her lovers, and why is she doing it? Because she has completely deluded herself.
Yeah, she's bought into a lie.
She mistakenly believes that these lovers, these Canaanite idols, are the ones providing her with bread, water, wool, flax, oil, and drink. She thinks her false gods are the source of her basic survival and her luxuries.
We really have to unpack the economics of this ancient idolatry. The Israelites didn't worship the Baals because they thought the statues were pretty.
No, they weren't just decorating.
They worshiped them because Baal was considered the god of the storm, the rain, and agricultural fertility. In an agrarian society, rain is the economy.
So it was a business decision.
Exactly.
Oh,
Worshipping Baal was an economic strategy. They believed that engaging in these localized cultic practices was what guaranteed their crop yields and their wealth.
So they took the gifts of the true God, the God of their history, the God who brought them out of Egypt, and attributed them entirely to the local gods of the dirt and the rain.
They were worshiping the creature, the system, rather than the creator.
And what is God's response to this massive identity theft? Because on the surface, it sounds incredibly harsh, almost vindictive.
You can definitely read that way.
In Hosea 2, God threatens to strip her naked, to take away the grain and the wine in its season, to completely pull the rug out from under her economic security. And then he drops this incredible line. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up thy way with thorns and make a wall that she shall not find her paths.
The hedge of thorns.
Now, I have to be the voice of the skeptic here, because taking away someone's food and throwing literal thorns in their path sounds like the actions of a bitter, toxic ex taking revenge.
If I can't have you, nobody can.
Exactly. I'm going to ruin your life. How are we supposed to interpret this as an act of divine love?
It's a very fair pushback, and it requires us to understand the underlying logic of intervention.
Okay, let's hear it.
When someone is trapped in a profound delusion, whether it's an addiction, a toxic relationship, or a completely destructive way of living, enabling them is not love.
Right.
Providing them with a smooth, easy road to their own destruction is not love. God is dismantling the illusion by removing the resources.
He's cutting off the supply.
He is revealing the true source of their prosperity by demonstrating what happens when he steps back.
Right. It's the ultimate reality check. It's like a parent who finally cuts up a 25-year-old's credit card.
Perfect analogy.
The kid thinks they're entirely self-sufficient, completely independent, all while living in the parents' basement and spending their money. You remove the resource not out of hatred, but to shatter the illusion of independence.
To show them where the resource is actually coming from.
Precisely. And the metaphor of the hedge of thorns is vital here. A hedge of thorns is not a punishment. It is a violently protective intervention.
Our sources quote an older commentary that phrases it beautifully. Crosses and obstacles in an evil course are great blessings.
I love that quote. Let's think about the mechanics of the text. She is desperately trying to chase down these toxic lovers that will ultimately bleed her dry and destroy her.
And the thorns are placed exactly in her path.
Yes. If she tries to push through them, they will tear at her, causing pain to deter her. And if she keeps going, she hits a solid wall that physically blocks her progress.
The utter frustration of not being able to reach her idols, the sheer exhaustion of hitting the wall, is the exact mechanism that breaks the spell.
It forces her to stop.
It forces her to look around at her broken life and say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then was it better with me than now.
This concept of the severe mercy is a massive obstacle to growth for us today.
It really is, because modern culture has conditioned us to absolutely despise roadblocks.
We hate them. We have a very specific, almost religious narrative about resistance. If you meet resistance, you just need to hustle harder.
You grind it out. You crush it.
Exactly. If there's a wall, you climb it, you smash through it, you disrupt it. We view failure, closed doors, or blocked paths as purely negative, shameful experiences.
If I don't get that promotion I was angling for, or if the startup I poured my life into collapses,
or if the relationship I'm desperately trying to hold together finally ends, we view it as a complete disaster. We think the universe is punishing us.
we completely lack the category of the severe mercy. We don't consider that sometimes burnout is not a sign of weakness, but a biological hedge of thorns, a failed business venture, or a sudden, terrifying lack of resources might be the wall. These things are often designed by reality or by the divine to stop you from destroying yourself in the relentless pursuit of things that cannot truly satisfy you.
If your path wasn't blocked, if the thorns weren't there, you would have sprinted right off the cliff with a smile on your face.
Exactly.
So let's do some real-time translation for your life right now. Think about a recent, deeply frustrating roadblock.
Maybe a closed door that made you angry.
Or a sudden loss of momentum in your career or your personal life where you felt like you hit a brick wall. Now try to reframe it entirely through the lens of Hosea chapter 2.
Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask yourself, how might this block actually be a hedge of thorns protecting me?
What toxic path, what exhaustion, what compromise of my values is this frustration actually saving me from?
It requires a profound, incredibly mature shift in perspective to see a wall not as a punishment, but as a safeguard.
To view your own frustration as a gift.
But the text doesn't just leave her bleeding at the wall. The thorns are just the emergency brake. Once the frantic, self-destructive running has finally stopped, a profound change of scenery is required.
Right, because you can't just stop someone from doing the wrong thing. You have to redirect them toward the right thing. Nature abhors a vacuum.
If you just leave her at the wall, she'll eventually try to climb it again.
This brings us to the next profound shift in the story. In Hosea 2.1 scene, God says, "Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak comfortably to her."
And he goes on to promise that he will give her vineyards from there and transform the valley of Achor, which literally translates to the valley of troubling, into a door of hope.
The psychological insight in these verses is just staggering. Let's look at the setting first. The wilderness.
In many ancient traditions, the wilderness is a place of punishment, wandering, and exile. It's where you go to die.
But our sources note a very different function here.
Right. The wilderness is a place away from the noise. It is an environment completely devoid of the bales, the lovers, the economic hustle, the social climbing.
It is a place of physical and social deprivation, yes, but specifically is the deprivation of distractions.
And notice the verb used. God doesn't drag her into the wilderness by her hair.
No, he allures her. He entices her.
It's a seduction back to authenticity.
That connects so deeply to broader human wisdom traditions across the globe. You look at almost every major culture or spiritual framework, and you find this ascetic tradition of retreating into the desert, the forest, or the mountains.
The vision quest, the silent retreat.
Exactly. Humans seem to have this innate biological need to be stripped of noise in order to hear the truth. You cannot possibly hear the quiet whisper of your own conscience, let alone the voice of the divine, if you have the TV blaring, your phone buzzing with notifications, and you are actively chasing 5 different exhausting career goals.
The noise grounds out the signal.
In the quiet of the wilderness, God can finally, as the Hebrew literally translates, speak to her heart.
And then within that wilderness, they arrive at the valley of Achor. As you mentioned, Achor means troubling.
Right.
For the ancient Israelite reader, this wasn't just a poetic name. It was a highly specific historical trigger word.
It brings up a lot of baggage.
It references a dark, infamous story from the book of Joshua, where a man named Achan committed a grievous sin that brought devastating military defeat and trouble upon the entire community. He was executed in that valley.
So the Valley of Achor was synonymous with monumental failure, shame, and severe consequence. It was the ground zero of their worst national memory.
Exactly. And the text says that this very valley of trouble will be transformed into the door of hope.
The enduring wisdom here is that you cannot bypass the trouble.
You can't take a detour around the valley of your own failures.
The site of your greatest pain, the exact location of your most shameful mistake, becomes the literal doorway to your restoration. You have to walk through the reality of what you've done to get to the hope on the other side.
You don't get hope instead of trouble. You find hope through the trouble.
That is a massive paradigm shift. And once she is through that door, once the heart has been softened in the wilderness, the text introduces what might be the most important conceptual shift in the entire book.
A complete change in vocabulary.
God says to her, "And it shall be at that day that thou shalt call me Ishi, and shalt call me no more Bali."
This is a linguistic detail we really need to discern carefully because it holds the key to the entire human spiritual experience.
Let's unpack the Hebrew words.
In Hebrew, Bali means my master or my lord. It is inherently hierarchical.
It implies ownership, strict reverence, and often fear.
Yes, it describes a purely transactional dynamic. I am the slave, you are the master. If I serve you, you pay me in crop yields. If I disobey you, you punish me with drought.
And Ishi.
Ishi, on the other hand, translates to my husband or my man. It implies intimacy, sweetness, equal partnership, and mutual affection.
We need to be careful here to extract the wisdom with discernment. The enduring wisdom isn't about reinforcing ancient human gender roles in marriage, where the husband is the master.
No, the text is actually subverting that.
It's about the fundamental nature of our relationship with the highest good, with the divine. God is saying, I don't want to be your boss anymore. I don't want an employee. I want a partner.
The divine desires relationship, not mere robotic compliance.
This is where we see the absolute tragedy of how most people live their lives today.
We operate almost entirely in Bali mode. Everything is a transaction.
We view our jobs this way. I put in my 40 hours of suffering, and you compensate me with a paycheck so I can survive. There's no passion, just a trade.
We view our intimate relationships this way too. I took the kids to practice and did the dishes, therefore you owe me physical affection or a free evening.
We keep score.
We do. And most tragically, we view our spirituality this way. We think, I went to a religious service, I donated 10% of my income, I didn't cheat on my taxes, therefore God owes me a smooth, cancer-free, economically prosperous life.
It is an exhausting, anxiety-ridden, fear-based way to exist because the moment the transaction fails, you feel cheated.
The entire invitation of the wilderness, the reason for the thorns and the stripping away of distractions, is to move us from Bali mode into Ishi mode.
To begin acting out of deep, unconditional mutual love, you do the right thing, not because you're terrified of the cosmic consequences of breaking the rules or because you're trying to earn a cosmic paycheck, but because you are intimately, deeply in love with the good.
Think about the difference between driving below the speed limit because you see a police car tucked in the median and you're terrified of a ticket.
All right.
Versus driving carefully because your newborn baby is sleeping in the car seat behind you. Both result in the same outward action, driving the speed limit.
But the internal universe is entirely different. One is the fear of a master, the other is love for a relationship.
That is the exact difference Hosea is highlighting. And to help you, the listener, make this shift from transactional living to transformational living, we need to lean into the wilderness.
I want to suggest a very real, somewhat intimidating practice for you today.
It's a challenge.
Create a 15-minute wilderness for yourself. Just 15 minutes. Find a space of absolute total silence.
No phone in the room, no music.
No TV in the background, not even an educational deep dive like this one. No books. Just sit in the quiet and use that time to observe your own mind.
Listen to what is actually going on in your heart, what anxieties bubble up.
What noise are you constantly using to avoid hearing the truth about your relationships or your motivations? Give yourself the gift of the wilderness because it is the only place you will ever transition from Bali to Ishi.
And it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but stick with it. Because once that internal heart transformation happens in the quiet of the wilderness, you eventually have to open your eyes and come back to the real world.
You can't stay on the silent retreat forever. You have to come back and actually put the broken pieces of your life back together.
Which brings us to the final movement of this story, found in Hosea chapter 3, the cost of grace and the discipline of waiting.
Right. Having established the internal emotional shift, the text brings us crashing back into the stark, gritty reality of the physical world.
How is a broken marriage or a fundamentally broken life actually restored in practice? It's not just a feeling.
In Hosea 3.1, God gives the incredibly difficult command, "Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress."
Hosea is told to go find Gomer, and he finds her in a horrifying situation. He has to go into the public marketplace and literally buy her back.
The economics of this purchase are staggering, and they tell us exactly how far she has fallen. The text says Hosea buys her for 15 pieces of silver and a homer and a half of barley.
Let's really unpack this because the details here are devastating. Our sources break down this transaction to show the absolute degradation of Gomer's situation.
Okay, lay out the numbers for us.
In the ancient Near East, the standard market price for a common slave was 30 pieces of silver. Hosea pays 15.
He pays exactly half the price of a slave.
And the rest of the payment is made in grain. A homer and a half of barley. Barley was the cheapest, lowest quality grain available.
It was the grain of the absolute poorest of the poor, right?
And was primarily used as animal feed.
So she is being valued at the absolute bottom of the barrel. She isn't living the high life with her lovers anymore. The figs are gone.
Long gone.
She has been completely used up by the system, discarded, and is now standing in a marketplace, likely a slave market or a red light district, being valued at less than a standard human slave bought with animal feed.
She is virtually worthless to the world economy at this point.
The price highlights her total ruin, and yet this is where the incomprehensible nature of this love is displayed. Hosea, the respected prophet, the holy man, steps into that dirty public marketplace.
He faces the sneers, the gossip, the utter humiliation of his peers. He walks up to the auction block, and he pays the price to redeem the woman who publicly destroyed his life. He buys her back.
But crucially, and this is the part where modern readers, who love a quick Hollywood ending, often get tripped up, the restoration is not instant.
He doesn't just hand over the silver, wrap his coat around her, take her home, and pretend nothing ever happened.
They don't immediately go back to marital bliss. Hosea sets a very specific boundary. He says to her, "Thou shalt abide for me many days, thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man. So will I also be for thee."
There is a strict probationary period.
The specific command mirrors Israel's impending historical reality. The nation is going to be conquered and sent into exile.
They will live many days without a king to lead them, without a prince, without their sacrifices or their temple.
They will sit in a state of historical suspended animation. They will be isolated from their idols. They won't be able to worship the Baals in exile, but they also won't be fully restored to their former glory in the Promised Land yet.
They have to wait.
I think the best way to understand this is to think about physical therapy after a massive traumatic car accident. Imagine you shatter your leg. You go into surgery. The surgeon meticulously pieces the bone back together, puts in the pins, and sews you up.
That surgery is the moment of grace.
It's the purchase in the marketplace. You are saved, but you do not get off that operating table, high-five the surgeon, and go run a marathon the next morning.
Definitely not. You are placed in a cast. You have to sit still.
And then you have to endure weeks and months of agonizing, slow, unglamorous, deeply frustrating physical therapy.
You experience muscle atrophy. You hit plateaus where you feel like you aren't getting better.
The connective tissue aches every time you try to bear weight. You have to endure the many days of healing to actually rebuild the capacity to walk again.
That is a perfect analogy. And there is a vital distinction to be made here about how we view grace and trust.
The modern listener might naturally recoil at the idea of buying a spouse or imposing a restrictive probation period on a partner.
It feels controlling to our modern ears. We absolutely must leave the ancient commerce of human beings in the past.
But if we discard the principle underneath it, we lose the wisdom of true reconciliation.
The reality is, forgiveness can be instantaneous.
Right.
Grace can be freely given in a single unmerited moment, just as Hosea freely bought her back. But the rebuilding of trust.
Trust is a structure.
It requires time, it requires firm boundaries, and it requires tangible, consistent evidence of changed behavior over many days.
That is such a critical point, because in our modern era, we are deeply addicted to cheap grace and instant gratification. We want PR spin, not repentance.
Think about our culture. If a celebrity or a politician commits a massive ethical violation, what happens?
They issue a carefully crafted notes app, apology on social media. They maybe do one tearful interview, and they expect to be fully reinstated to their position of influence by next Tuesday.
And we do the exact same thing in our personal lives. If we break trust with a partner, if we lie to a close friend, or if we get caught cutting corners at work, we say, "I'm sorry, I messed up."
And the moment those words leave our mouths, we expect the relationship to instantly normalize. We expect the slate to be perfectly clean.
And if the other person is still hurt 3 days later, if they are still hesitant to trust us, we get defensive.
We say, look, I said I was sorry, I owned it, why are you still bringing this up? Why are you holding this over my head?
We resent the physical therapy. We demand instant normalization because sitting in the tension of our own failure makes us deeply uncomfortable.
But true, enduring restoration demands humility. It demands the willingness to sit quietly in the many days of proving your faithfulness.
Gomer had to sit quietly in the house. She was protected from her lovers, yes, but she also wasn't immediately enjoying the full intimacy and privileges of the marriage bed.
She had to detox from her trauma and her addiction to the chaotic life she had been living. She had to heal. And Hosea had to wait for her.
So if you were listening to this, I want you to reflect on how you handle your own failures. When you have broken trust, whether it's a massive betrayal in a marriage, or just consistently failing to show up for a friend, or compromising your integrity at work, are you demanding instant normalization?
Are you rushing the healing process of the people you hurt simply because your own guilt makes you uncomfortable? Or can you embrace the humble, quiet discipline of the waiting period?
Can you look at the person you wronged and say, I'm going to sit in these many days and prove to you through consistent action that I am changing?
Can you endure the physical therapy required to truly rebuild what you broke?
It takes immense courage to sit in that waiting room of reconciliation.
Yeah.
It means fully accepting the painful consequences of your past actions while simultaneously maintaining a stubborn hope for the future.
You are holding the pain of yesterday and the promise of tomorrow at the exact same time. And honestly, that tension is the entire arc of this incredible ancient text.
It really is.
Let's pull all of this together because we've covered a massive amount of psychological and spiritual ground today. We started with the murky, uncomfortable diagnostic X-ray of a fundamentally broken marriage.
We saw the shocking mirror of our own betrayals, how easily and seamlessly we trade our deepest commitments for the figs, the fleeting luxuries and status symbols of modern success.
We watched the terrifying, compounding consequences of our choices, how the momentum of minor betrayals cascades into the breaking of our strength, the withdrawal of mercy, and ultimately a complete loss of identity and connection.
But right at the bottom of that descent, we saw the mechanics of divine intervention. We saw the severe protective gift of frustrating thorns and blocked paths that stop us from destroying ourselves.
We explored the necessity of the wilderness, the quiet deprivation of distractions where our hearts can finally shift from a fearful, transactional Bali mindset to an intimate, transformational Ishi partnership.
And finally, we confronted the patient, costly, profoundly unglamorous work of rebuilding broken trust over many days.
It fundamentally changes how you view the muddy waters of human failure. When you look through the lens of Hosea, failure isn't just the end of the story, it's the raw material for a deeper restoration.
It absolutely does. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder as we close this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We are heavily conditioned by movies, by pop culture, and by romance novels to believe that the ultimate proof of love is the initial flawless spark. The sweeping romantic gesture, the perfect, aesthetically pleasing wedding day where everything goes right.
But the ancient wisdom of Hosea suggests something radically different and honestly, much more beautiful.
Perhaps the most profound, undeniable evidence of true love is not the initial spark when everyone is at their best. Perhaps the greatest proof of love is the willingness to walk into the dirty public marketplace of our absolute worst failures, to pay the humiliating price for our brokenness, and then to patiently, quietly sit with us in the messy tension for as many days as it takes for us to heal.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.